Sponsored by Wondrium. Winnie the Pooh is the ultimate Daoist sage, at least according to the author Benjamin Hoff in his best-selling book on Daoism and Winnie the Pooh. According to Hoff, Winnie the Pooh, with his carefree, effortless way of floating through life, exemplifies the Daoist concept of Wuwei. Wuwei can be translated in a lot of different ways. Actionless action, non-action, inaction, non-deliberate action, or non-interference. We briefly mentioned Wuwei in our Intro to Daoism video, which you can watch here, but today we'll be diving much deeper into the concept. But hold on, some of these translations are confusing, right? Isn't actionless action a paradox? How can something be both acting and not acting? And how have different Daoist writers defined this elusive concept? For the sake of convenience, I'll generally use non-action as the English translation of Wuwei. We can see hints of Wuwei as a general concept emerging out of what's called the spring and autumn period of Chinese history, between the 700s and 400s BCE. We may even see hints of the concept in Confucianism, but the word comes from the central Daoist text, the Tao Te Ching. If you remember from our intro video, the Tao Te Ching is a collection of short sayings, compiled over the course of a few hundred years following the 4th century BCE, and it's attributed to the probably mythical philosopher Lao Tzu. This text describes Wu Wei as a characteristic of the Tao, which can be thought of as ultimate reality and how it manifests in everyday life. The Tao Te Ching says, the Tao does not act, and yet there is nothing it does not do. Thus, scholars describe the Tao as an organic process that just moves along naturally and spontaneously. In other words, it does not act. But at the same time, there is nothing it does not do. It is the process through which the entire universe unfolds. But all of this is very abstract. Is there a way to make this more practical? Well, Wu Wei can be a personal moral philosophy for how you should conduct yourself through life. The text says the sage manages his affairs through non-action and conveys his instruction without speaking. Thus, you can act non-actingly in business, relationships, or even parenting. The scholar Livia Cohn uses the example of a parent not being too overbearing, and instead allowing their kids to make their own discoveries, develop their dominant talents, and grow at their own rate. In other words, a Tao of the non-helicopter parent. But Wu Wei was especially thought of as a way for how government should function, a political philosophy of non-action. The scholar Karen Lay argues that the ideal Taoist government refrains from using force and domination, violence, and weapons, as they prevent the people from being spontaneous. The Taoist political ruler should on one hand refrain from coercive policies and practices, but also implement policies that nurture an environment where individuals are not subjected to the imposition of artificial conformist norms. But that's just how the Tao Te Ching uses the term. Different Taoist thinkers in later centuries offered different interpretations. The other foundational Taoist text, called the Zhuangzi, uses it to mean things as diverse as non-mind, non-emotion, and a state of harmony with nature and the Tao. And the Huainanzi, a Western Han text with strong Taoist influences, uses it to mean not to act out of character, or without an awareness of one's circumstances. And even this is glossing over a lot of nuance. This is one of the reasons why you'll see Wu Wei translated so many different ways, or not even translated at all. Early Taoists and other philosophers did not use it to mean the same thing, but there's a lot of overlap between these definitions, since each text is in conversation with the previous texts, and Taoists over the later centuries focused on just a few interpretations, which we'll focus on here. Specifically, non-action as doing nothing, non-action as not striving but harmonizing your actions with the Tao, and non-action as natural or spontaneous action. Let's start with non-action as doing nothing. By this, Taoists meant not altering actions to challenge or confront obstacles in your path. One of the best metaphors for understanding this interpretation of Wu Wei is to imagine a rock in a stream. The Tao Te Ching says, that which is of all things most yielding can overwhelm that which is of all things most hard. That is how I know the value of action that is actionless. Here, that which is of all things most yielding refers to water, and that which is of all things most hard is rock. Imagine a big stone that falls into a stream. The water doesn't push against the stone trying to move it. It bends around it. But even as the water bends around the stone, the water continues to flow downstream. Eventually, the stone will erode away, but the water flows as it did before, during, and after the stone's existence. Non-action can also involve not striving for what you want. things like fame, wealth, and power, but also even peace or social harmony. Instead, you should let your actions follow the natural patterns of the universe. We often describe this as being in harmony with the Tao. Both the Tao Te Ching and the Zhuangzi praise those who strive for nothing and yet obtain what is needed. In other words, if you pattern your actions according to the natural laws or principles of the universe, you will effortlessly arrive where you should be. Returning to the water and stone analogy, we see again that the water is not striving to remove the stone from its path, and yet ultimately the stone is cleared away. So if you're in harmony with the Tao, then following your natural course will not only result in getting what you need, but ultimately will result in removing or overcoming any supposed obstacles in your way. I say supposed because what you perceive as an obstacle might not actually be one. Consider a parable from the Huainanzi about a lost horse. In the story, a family skilled in fortune-telling loses their horse, so the family's neighbors offer their condolences. The family just lost a very expensive asset, but the father of the family cautioned the neighbors, "Don't be so quick to offer your condolences. Who's to say this won't quickly change to good luck?" Several months later, the horse returned with a whole herd of horses. Now the neighbors praised the family's good fortune. But the father again warned that their luck could change again. Sure enough, while riding one of those horses, his son fell and broke his leg. Another stroke of bad luck. But wait, the next year nomads raided the border, and all those who were able went off to fight and died in battle. But the son with the broken leg was left behind and survived the war. Once again, what seemed like bad luck was actually good luck. This story highlights why Daoists think Wuwei is critical both as a state of being and as a way of conducting yourself. You have no way of knowing if your actions will ultimately help or hinder you. Even if you act with good intentions, you still can't be sure there won't be unintended negative consequences. Thus, non-action as an action prevents harm, while non-action as the state of being in harmony with the Tao ensures you will live out the number of years heaven has allotted you, and thus avoid a premature and usually violent death. Daoists aren't big on living fast and dying young. It's all about that longevity and immortality. The third way to understand Wuwei that we'll examine here is as natural action, which is probably the most common use of the term. Returning yet again to Lao Tzu's metaphor of the water and the stone. The water does not change its nature or become something else now that the stone is there. The stone erodes away precisely because the water only acts like itself. For people, it's helpful to think of the difference between reaction and reflex. From the Taoist perspective, reflex is non-action and reaction is action. A reflex is innate, unconscious, and effortless. It's devoid of emotion and happens spontaneously, in the sense that it seems to happen of its own accord, modern knowledge of physiology notwithstanding. A reaction is the opposite. Even though reaction might seem automatic, it's a product of the mind. It can be something learned and practiced. Another idea that early Taoists associate with non-action is the concept of uselessness. You can see that in the parable mentioned before. The son's broken leg made him useless to the army, but preserved his life. The principle of uselessness is also commonly taught using the example of a gnarled and crooked tree. Useless for building things, but precisely because of its uselessness, the tree is never cut down and lives a long life as a tree, which is what nature intended. Moreover, the tree is only situationally useless. When used for shade or shelter, the tree is useful. It's useless only if you mistake it as a tree for timber or fruit. The Tao Te Ching also associates non-action with the virtues of flexibility and passivity. Arguably, Wuwei is a form of action that encompasses both of these, depending on the situation. Returning again to the analogy of a stone in the stream, we can see both of the virtues present in non-action. The water demonstrates flexibility by bending around the stone, but it also demonstrates passivity by not challenging or confronting the stone. In early Chinese thought, these are feminine virtues, and it's clear that the philosophical strands of the text embrace a positive view of the feminine overall, in contrast to most of its contemporary thinkers. So whether you understand Wuwei in terms of reflex, uselessness, flexibility, or spontaneity, it's important to remember that there's not a one-size-fits-all answer. An effortless and authentic existence will vary depending on who or what you are. So too is non-action equally dependent on the person and situation. One of the most famous stories from the Zhuangzi illustrates what this means. Once when Zhuangzi was fishing in the Pu River, The king of Chu sent 2 officials to him and announced to him, "I would like to trouble you with the administration of my realm." Zhuangzi held onto the fishing pole and without turning his head said, "I have heard that there is a sacred tortoise in Chu that has been dead for 3,000 years. The king keeps it wrapped in cloth and boxed and stores it in the ancestral temple. Now, would this tortoise rather be dead and have its bones left behind and honored, or would it rather be alive and dragging its tail through the mud?" The 2 officials responded, "It would rather be alive and dragging its tail in the mud." Zhuangzi said, "Go away. I will drag my tail through the mud." This means that for the turtle, being dead but highly honored was worthless when compared with its unglamorous but natural way of living. For Zhuangzi, serving in government would have been equally unnatural and therefore worthless. Yet for the king of Chu, who was born to rule, refusing to do so and instead going off to spend his days fishing would have been unnatural and thus not Wuwei. So to return to the beginning, Wuwei can be translated a lot of different ways because it means different things depending on the context and the philosopher who's using the term. It's something you do or don't do. It's a characteristic of the Tao. It's a state of being that reflects the patterns of the cosmos. It's being flexible and passive. It embraces spontaneity, effortlessness, and authenticity. It's doing nothing, not striving, and natural action. Thanks to Wondrium for sponsoring this video. Wondrium is an online learning platform featuring a ton of educational video content. Want to learn more about Chinese philosophy? How about how to play the piano? Or maybe epic engineering failures? No matter what you're interested in, you can find a tutorial, documentary, or lecture series on Wondrium. They're always adding new content too. As an academic who studies early Christianity, I'm particularly excited about their newest series, Searching for the Historical Jesus. In 15 episodes, you get an in-depth look into the historical context of Jesus of Nazareth. The series features amazing cinematography from key archaeological sites around the Sea of Galilee, like the ancient city of Sepphoris located near Nazareth. And in the final episodes, you'll also learn about the growth of Christianity around the Roman Empire. If you'd like to watch this series and more, Wondrium is offering the Religion for Breakfast audience a free trial. Just head on over to wondrium.com/religionforbreakfast or click the link in the comments below. Thanks everyone. Thanks for watching.